we did lose was their increased ideological embeddedness in the schools themselves, where we were able to win important things about criminalization. In other words, like I always said, it took us almost 7 years to win the logical thing of saying 12-year-olds shouldn't be arrested, right? And even though it still happens, even after we sign an agreement, and that the last struggle that I did work with the Strategy Center, right, was to get rid of military-grade weapons that they had received from the Department of Defense, which included, 3 grenade launchers, 61 M16s, and 1 MRAP tank that was used in Afghanistan and Iraq, where, the school police and the school district believed somehow that, this was a good idea. We finally not only got them to actually return all that weaponry, but in fact to apologize to the community for that kind of double speak. On one hand, they're saying they're counselors and they're mentors, and yet, at the same time, they're taking the weapons of, of policing. Next slides. In my work with Strategy Center and also with Dignity in Schools campaign, and even with Forward Change, one critical alliance for us was the alliance that we built with the Black Organizing Project in Oakland. We were probably some of the very few organizations in the state that were openly trying to take on policing in schools. And, in our sort of I've been working with Bob more explicitly over the last year of trying to just better grasp why this struggle in Oakland is going to be very critical for us. And if there's anything that I want you guys to sort of take away from my presentation is why that struggle is still very important, that it's going to require a statewide structure to support them to be able to win this victory. They're going to win. They're going to win the victory to remove the police in schools. I think the question is going to be at what scale, at what kind of leverage they're going to end up, what are going to be protections they're going to be able to protect, and that we don't want just a new form of policing that's no longer armed, that's no longer embedded in a police department, but it still has the same mentality. And that any statewide structure right now about speaking about taking on policing in schools, that has to be sort of at the central aspect of our struggle. 3 things that I want to say about how we think about policing in school and why is it so embedded, right? In Oakland in the 1950s, as the mass migration of Black people came into Oakland, into Los Angeles, into many of the cities in the West Coast, right? There was the white power structure basically decided that people were inherently, especially because in places like Oakland, the boom for jobs ended very quickly after World War II. And what often came with this sort of viewpoint that Black dysfunction of the family, Black delinquency that was inherent in young people, and as schools became more and more Black or brown, the school and city officials began to push for having probation in schools, having police and community police in schools as a way to sort of manage young people, to sort of surveil young people. And so in Oakland, while police wasn't deputized until the 80s, the embeddedness of police in schools started in the 1950s. And under the same rhetoric that we hear now, which is like, well, cops could be our mentors. Cops could be, great counselors. Cops can be, people that can help, can build community and police, conflict to reduce it by sort of having police, sort of having that relationship with policing. Next slide. The second thing was, of course, in the 1960s, was to confront Black power in Oakland and brown power and pretty much all the demands for a revolutionary change of what Carl was speaking about transforming society, of having community control of schools, right? In Oakland, of course, the emergence of the Black Panther Party meant that they became an important power player. Next slide, Angela, thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. In 1970, the Black Panther Party was a critical force in Oakland. We often, the way that history unfortunately is done in the United States, the only thing we know is that they carried guns and that they had a 10-point program and that maybe they went way overboard with the armed struggle. you know, those are, I would say, all revisionist forms of history without understanding the depth of the Black Panther Party and how important they were to a city like Oakland, where they were actually major power players, where in the 1970s, they served as mediators between the teachers union and the Oakland Unified School District as mediators to end a strike in the 1970s. By the 1960s and 70s, we saw now permanent armed patrols in Oakland Unified. Here, there's an article in October 1973 that the Panthers were opposing police in schools. Again, we think of this issue as such a new issue, but in fact, the community has been struggling against these kind of issues. The question is that they were left alone. They weren't defended when they needed to be defended about how we needed to get rid of police. And here, you know, they were speaking about a new program that introduced 250 armed police officers in the schools. They implemented zero tolerance in the schools, and a lot of it was in response to a lot of the organizing that was happening in the district. Last slide that I'll have here, why this is important for us to understand. So then what happened in California and the way that they embedded police in our schools was that, you know, this is George Stuyvesant here on the right-hand side. For folks who don't know him, he was the former governor here in California. He was really the architect of the mass incarceration system here in California. And before that, he was the state attorney. And as state attorney, he actually sued the city of Los Angeles because he was saying that young people were put in danger in the city of Los Angeles by the school unified school district. That lawsuit didn't go anywhere. It was all like a Republican right-wing show. But what happened was that movement around the struggle of you know, painting our schools out of control got enmeshed in a broader struggle around right-wing sort of you know, struggles around trying to really reduce the power of the courts, to really take on sort of you know, implementation of things like, you know, ending you know, court discretion, you know, mandatory minimums, got embedded in this thing called Proposition 8. And in Proposition 8, which is a sort of broad victims bill of rights that passed in 1982, one of the key things that was written in that thing, and it's, you know, one of these massive propositions that had many arms to it, but included this constitutional right to safety in schools. And under that is what ultimately became the deputization of police in schools, right? That they assumed that by now having, can we go to the next slide? What began to happen was that not only did they pass a new constitutional right, Angela, can I move to the next slide? Sorry. Was that what also happened that, you know, right-wing sort of public interest law firms, which was the other side of groups like us, right, started suing local districts under this guise of, you know, schools lacking sort of safety for their students, were in violation of this new constitutional right, and they were bringing lawsuits for, you know, which were often mainly interactions between, you know, fights between students, and using that as a leverage to use the court. And so in Oakland, for example, Oakland fought hard against trying to have a sort of deputized, you know, regular armed force inside the school campuses. And yet, you know, both we had here both, you know, kind of like a legal tactic to sort of force the districts to do it. Then there was also state legislation. They built a whole body, a commission around school safety in the school district. So I think really ultimately here, what I'm trying to sort of hopefully tell everybody is that these issues are too embedded for us to be careful about how we think about this struggle. Because a simple defunding campaign, one, there's really, in essence, no real funding for policing in schools. It all comes from all the general funds. To a certain degree, they're illegally using LCFF funds, if they are. Defunding without actually disbanding these kind of legislation that actually gives police powers to schools, that actually legislates the ability for a district to have police in schools. So in other words, even if you're able to win on the local level to end a contract, it doesn't stop from a school district to choosing to have their own police department. So for us, it's very critical to really think about how we're going to have this fight. And for us, you know, the struggle in Oakland is very critical. if we win Oakland correctly or in their own terms, because Bob has won this fight, right? They've spent 10 years, I know I'll come back at the end about sort of the work that they've been doing, but they've won this struggle. Now it's about how much leverage we're going to have for the rest of the state, and why this struggle for the next 2 weeks is going to be important, but to be honest, for the next 6 months. And that we're going to need everybody's support to get to that point. And I would say that for us to also think about how we also think about on the state level, not so much a quick sort of victory or fix, but how we actually hold the state accountable. We cannot just defund and disband police without thinking about the harm that the state of California did by arming police in schools, by deputizing police in schools, by expanding that kind of system. And it's going to be critical for us to examine, for example, to document the last 30, 40 years of the harm that they've created in our schools. And that, in fact, that's the real payment that we need, not just defunding or disbanding of police. Therefore, for kids who go to school now aren't going to have police, we need them to pay for all the harm they've already caused. And so I think that's what I'm hoping that one of the conversations we can actually have. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you so much, Manuel. Manuel is covering so many bases now in grad school in New Mexico, and still in such deep solidarity in the work with BOP and other partners in Dignity in Schools campaign. Now we're going to move to, I'm going to introduce Maisie Chin. Angela's going to stop the screen share for a moment. And I want to say it's my humble honor to have supported Maisie and the Black and Brown parents of CADRE in their fight in South LA since I became an attorney, and having supported them in their multiple human rights shadow report documentation of this issue. So Maisie is gonna do this piece, and then Maisie and then Manuel will finish with some really important points regarding BOP's current work that he started to share, and then there will be a bit more from Maisie and Manuel and Carl and I around a Dignity in Schools campaign framework and what solidarity will look like in the coming weeks and months and years. Thank you so much, Maisie, for being with us today.
Sure. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you everyone for let us come in and help, you know, everybody's thinking with all this context. And equally, you know, we've been working with Strategy Center and YJC for years, with Public Counsel for years. And some of you know, I mean, I think people that we just do school discipline, but there's a real specific way in which we have tried to tackle school discipline as a precursor to take on, truthfully, you know, ending our mass incarceration state, which is all part of racial capitalism. And so, you know, we really do practice this notion that if you actually address and redress the harms done to Black families inside the educational system, that you will in fact you know, raise the bar for everyone and actually create a much more humane system. And so in many ways, when we started at CADRE, it was a very open-ended process. And I'm just, you know, I'm not going to go through a whole history of CADRE, but I do want to name a few key organizing principles that we use that got us here, because they're also very important in staying in terms of practicing solidarity with BOP. And so, you know, we kind of want to start off with this because this happens to be the title of our a report that we put out 3 years ago that documented the full, complete lack of fidelity to implementing anything as simple as what's called positive behavior support. And so it's just to really focus on the fact that, feeding off of what Manuel just said, that parents have often been divided and conquered in the process of justifying harsher school cultures that rely on punishment and law enforcement for social control. The parents often were the same kids that went to those schools, and then, you know, now police are often used to dictate and constrain how they show up on campus and their behavior on campus. So it's all embedded, and many folks often think that parent engagement somehow is like the lack, quote unquote, the lack of parent engagement in places like South Central LA somehow is because the parents aren't caring or aren't involved, or there's some other sort of physical barrier. And while those are true, that there's an alienation that keeps folks away from campus, there's campus practices that push parents away, and there's always the threat of law enforcement when that presence or when the behavior of a parent is just not what the school wants. And so I really want to emphasize the fact that there is a fundamental disdain, political hatred for parents, Black parents in particular, that has just like everything Emanuel said, has shaped the context for parent engagement in these contested schools like those in South Central. It isn't true everywhere because not every school has Black parents and Black students, but in the places that do, it's almost always contested, and parent engagement, if there is a desire to challenge a practice, not even a policy, but a practice and treatment, there is almost always retribution and backlash, similar to what Manuel just talked about. And often the institution has assumed control over, what can happen on a school campus. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Actually, this is the cover of a report, but I'm going to skip to the next slide and just show, because when we were door knocking as we were building CADRE in the early 2000s, a lot of, you could literally experience the impact of racialized capitalism and the divide and conquer, because, literally you could knock on one door and have someone sort of support a heavy-handed police culture in a school, a heavy zero tolerance, and then you could go down the block and a parent is completely complaining about how their rights were or their children's rights seem to have been violated when they were suspended. And so what we did is we just tried to understand this from a deeper root cause level, as opposed to trying to run with an issue, like, oh, the parent said this, let's work on this. We actually tried to go deeper, and in tons of, hours and hours of door knocking and house meetings, we focused in on the fact that there is a root cause to even the attitudes and the understandings that parents have with school discipline. And I think I also want to make a claim here that I think in the world of organizing the movement and building the movement to end the school to prison pipeline, I still want to say that even though, in my humble opinion, this work was really spearheaded by Black parents in different places around the country, and CADRE's parents are part of that network, included Mississippi, included some parents in Denver, and certainly us here in South LA. And that despite all of that, the initiation, the bravery of going to the school and questioning a discipline practice and the political act that is, because it often led to such horrible outcomes involving law enforcement or incarceration, that brave act often just gets completely thrown to the side. And I want to stay here that if we do not rectify the wedge, the generational wedge we have created, that I think white supremacy has created, where adults and parents are demonized, even by progressive folks, and we sort of romanticize youth organizing and youth. Like, we really have to rectify that division, because you need parents to not want to call the police. You need parents to want to not have school police officers and still feel like they can feel safe. There has to be an ideological shift in organizing that has to happen. And so at CADRE, when we saw these different opinions, we decided to try to keep going to the root. And while in 2003, we might not have used the word white supremacy, we were definitely trying to center the experiences of Black parents, and that what eventually we unpacked it as white supremacy, and that there is overt white supremacy and then there's covert, and that this overt and covert is often not examined. It is often used to justify many things that then become out of anyone's control. So I know this graphic is hard to read, and I'm having a hard time reading it. So I just want to point out that if it's overt, like, okay, random searches, kids are being pulled over, stopped in a hallway for searches, or they're randomly selected for their locker to be searched, or metal detectors, or the constant calling of school police to handle a discipline issue, when school fights break out, giving everybody a ticket and rounding everybody up and sitting them down in handcuffs like they're going to be arrested. And certainly, as Manuel pointed out, truancy tickets and citations, all the way to corporal punishment, you know, all of those things, they seem overt, but there's a whole ideological practice that is being, you know, embedded in school culture that is what we think is under covert, that was to seem more covert white supremacy. Because what happens in the next slide, if you look at covert white supremacy, these are really the things that pit folks against each other, you know, and create a culture where you feel like you need to police people, period. And so everyone knows this, the community knows this. It just seems like folks in education don't seem to know this, or certain people in education don't know this, but, you know, blaming students and parents. Again, blaming victims of years of disenfranchisement and disempowerment and dehumanization. Divide and conquer, you know, making some folks feel like they're good and the other folks are bad, and always supporting the folks who are considered good, to the point where folks are even turning against their own community. There is elitist and savior complexes of school staff. Here it says white, but I think it's sometimes the school culture of a school district, it can make anybody assume that savior complex, where the professional knows best. And that has often led to people calling children's services, has led to people calling the police, has led to people using psychiatric holds on kids inappropriately. It has led to a denial of, you know, disparities or bias. And there's a lot more here, but I just want to focus on the fact that this is often the environment in which parents walk into, and they have to fit somewhere, otherwise they don't really get to participate. And so one of the things we have tried to do in all of our school discipline work is completely tie it to this, which is, it isn't just about suspensions. It is about dismantling white supremacy in school discipline, and the trend that parents are often pitted against each other and pitted against the system. And if they're not compliant with the law and order culture and the social control culture of schools, that they're deemed bad. So if we're going to win, you know, we have to organize parents to begin to leverage themselves and their power that is inherent to actually begin to dismantle practices. So yes, we focused on policies, and I guess we go to the next slide. We did a lot of grassroots organizing in the early 2000s, 2005 and 6, and had a people's hearing. We named all the human rights violations that we were learning about by knocking on doors that occurred as a result of school discipline. And then it led to us being able to influence LAUSD's adoption of something simple called school-wide positive behavior support. And I hate saying it too, because it sounds so basic these days. But it really is a precursor, because it started to untangle, and if we could go to the next slide, it started to untangle and start to give meaning to school pushout. And back then it was all dropout. Now we've been able to frame it as school pushout. And instead of just having a discipline policy, we started to marry it with the outcomes. You know, it wasn't just about what you do when this happens, or what you do when a student does this, and when is it okay to suspend a student, which is kind of how folks talked about it. It was all about linking it to actual practices of pushout. I know I'm running out of time, so I don't want to linger too many places. Everyone knows what this is, so I'm going to skip probably even more. Like, I just want to say that PBS is very, very basic. It all comes from behavioral support ideology. I want to stay focused on how this feeds into the school police debate and fights that we are, and how it led to Dignity Schools Campaign California as well, because we didn't get here because we ran a policy, and we didn't get here because of policy. We actually got here because of organizing, and we got here from leveraging the stories and really taking a political risk in making a thing, you know, taking all these stories and stitching them together and saying, this is an actual thing. This is not an individual parent situation. This is a systemic issue. Parents are literally experiencing the same thing, regardless of what school, or the minute they speak up against racialized mistreatment, the same patterns happen. In schools where there are also Latino families, they see this going on. It contributes to racial tension, because everyone gets caught up in the divide and conquer. And so if you constantly see Black parents get arrested for being disruptive, and their kids being sent out of class for being disruptive, or arrested for being just, something escalating and considering an arrest necessary, that literally undermines any racial solidarity and partnership that you can build. And it forces people to choose whether or not they support policing in schools or not. And so school discipline very much creates the culture of removal. It creates the, the line that you have to choose where you believe in removal or you don't believe in removal. And that's what we were fighting back in the day before all these policies happened, before restorative justice became a thing, before anything happened in Sacramento. We were trying to unroot this and show people that school discipline had to be the place where parents leverage their power. It had to be something where we use this battle to begin to dismantle white supremacy. And because we were able to pull at the strings, it helped lay a groundwork to really question all the other more extreme forms of school discipline. Because if you started school police, getting rid of school police, people would have focused on safety. If you push up also from the bottom and you allow the North Star, you push up from the bottom, you raise the threshold, and you also begin questioning the most overt forms of repression via school police, then you sort of create a whole, just a whole body of work that you tie together into a movement. And that is really pretty much what we've done in DSC California. It's all made of groups that we've cut our teeth on challenging school discipline work all across the state. We've all passed policies. We've all won MOUs. We've all won money for programs. We've all created one community, participation mandates and whatnot, so that we could be at the table. And none of it has actually worked. Black students are still habitually and disproportionately dehumanized in the school system. And so the role of Dignity in Schools Campaign California centering the BOPS campaign is not by accident. It's very deliberate. It wasn't just because we wanted, that it just happened to be the thing that we did. It was very, very deliberate. And in the support of BOPS campaign, we've literally organized parents all over the state of California to support the concept of removing police from schools. At least we've begun that process. There are parents from very conservative parts of the state that without DSC California, they would never interrogate this concept. And so we are building a statewide apparatus but really it's a consciousness raising apparatus so that people can understand the strategies that BOP is employing and why we need to center. We need to, as Emanuel said, we need to make sure Oakland wins first. It is a Black-led effort, and we need to make sure it wins first. And we need to then make sure all of our organizing around school discipline is headed towards that same North Star. Because if we want RJ, but we don't want the removal of school police, all you're going to get is school police officers that get paid to do RJ, because that's what we got in LA. If you don't want, if we don't fight for school police and we just focus on reform measures or programs and trainings, you're just going to have probation on campus becoming case managers and social workers. Everything is dependent on law enforcement at this point to get any services, and we have to dismantle that. And even parents desperate for help for their children have often had to call the police on their own kids just to get some counseling. And that's why we have to change the whole paradigm of we have to not allow law enforcement to be our caregivers and our caretakers. And we have to make sure that our parents and our family, the heads of households and our family leaders are able to have a different system from which to care for their families. And the more that a school becomes the contested space over policing, the more that we're going to lose our hold on those possibilities. So it's a very deliberate thing why we're organizing parents and why we're supporting BOP. And the opportunity has given us to build a statewide consciousness around everything that Manuel just shared. Because many people do not get that history, and they think it's just it's an intervention that can be easily won because we won suspension, we won a reduction in suspensions, or we won a ban on willful defiance. Winning the elimination of school police is really another holy grail. And so we have to really look at this as a protracted struggle and expect the backlash, expect the retribution, because we are dismantling one of the key anchors of racial capitalism by dismantling this from schools. So I think my time is up. I talked really fast, but I think there's time for questions later. And I hope I also wove in Dignity in Schools Campaign California, so that if you have any questions about that, you all feel ready to ask them. So, thank you.
So for so for questions, we want to make sure we won't have time to orally do questions. If you have questions, please put it in the chat. At the moment, Victor is collecting all those questions right now, and then at the end we will report out some of those questions, and we'll have the different speakers speak. Just also, also want to let you know. We have been working really hard to have the Black Organizing Project, Black-led organization in Oakland, to come and speak today about their work around police and school in Oakland. What led up to it, what happened, what was the struggle around it, what was the challenges, contradictions related to and close to their verge of victory. They wasn't able to make it today. Partly because yesterday they had the press conference, they're exhausted. Even this morning, we really worked hard to try to get them to come on because I think it would have been really powerful. But Manuel has been working with, and a team, as what Manuel and others as a team has been working with closely and collaborating with Black Organizing Project since the beginning. They've been had long dialogues, strategic planning, around how to, one, move this issue strategically, think in terms of raising political consciousness, and tactically, how do you move, win in the Oakland Unified School District? Because for us, Oakland is in a unique one historically, both in struggle, but in terms of it has a police department within their school district. And that is probably one of the greatest and most difficult lift, to remove a school police within the school district versus those districts like ours in Sacramento that contract with the Sac City Police Department, which is a different struggle, different way. And but we view the work that's going on in Oakland, and particularly Bob, as our North Star. So I was going to have Manuel come back on to talk more about what that is, what that struggle was like, and give us some context to that. Thank you.
Yeah, hey everybody. Again, you know, I was asked by Jackie to do this for folks, and as Carl said, you know, they yesterday Bob introduced the George Floyd resolution to eliminate the Oakland Unified School District, and they had the board meeting lasted until about 11 in the morning, and now they're running into some new set of contradictions as this resolution moves forward. Sorry. So I was just saying that, you know, Bob and Jackie have asked me to do this presentation. As Carl said, I've been working with Bob both as an ally for over 11 years. And over the last year, I've been pretty much embedded in supporting their work as they move forward. So next slide, please. You know, again, you know, the Black Organizing Project has been organizing in Oakland for now initially about 14 years. In 2010, you know, they began to move toward addressing this issue about policing in schools and ending sort of zero tolerance in the schools. As y'all can imagine, they're called the Black Organizing Project. It wasn't geared primarily about schools, but it became very clear for them that that was going to be an important sort of arena of struggle for them. And in 2011, they launched what is basically called the Bettering Our School System campaign. Embedded in that is both questions about not only addressing, you know, ending zero tolerance, but they're very clear that they were going to move on trying to remove police, and had a 2020 vision to remove police in schools. And of course, you know, for them, it meant that they began to tackle all the different infrastructures of violence and punishment and discipline and sort of harsh discipline at Oakland, right? So they had a sequence of set of struggles that they engaged in. The first was about trying to even make restrictions on the police to bring control of the police. As you see there in 2010, you know, the Oakland School Police Department, speaking about the kind of direct violence, right? They killed a young man outside a school grounds of Raheem Brown in 2010. And, you know, in many ways, this campaign for BOP is very much dedicated to that moment, right? Shows the kind of out of control and violence of the repercussions of having police in schools, right? Next slide. I will say that, you know, over the last year, right, this campaign has been moving forward to sort of get to this 2020 vision that they've had, right? In October of 2019, they presented their People's Plan to Remove Police in Schools. It's a very comprehensive plan. If people have not had a chance to read it, I really recommend everybody to look at it, right? It clearly defines that we are going to remove police completely from schools, right? It speaks about the types of reinvestment that can go into the work, and then what it would really actually take, you know, kind of the steps that we're going to have to require, what types of you know, infrastructure inside the school district, who's going to have to be involved, right? What's the role of the community involved in this sort of new way to reimagine what safety in school would be. And of course, you know, not surprising, you know, this plan became even more urgent after the school police department attacked a series of parents who had come to oppose the cutting of the set of school closures that are happening in Oakland, or are about to happen in Oakland. And the school police, you know, violently attacked a group of parents and educators. And really then that moment, right, of like all those years of organizing plus that moment really brought to light. Let's move to the next slide. In March, I'll just do quickly, in March, they had a move toward, as they were discussing, you know, Oakland Unified has cut about 600 key staff over the last 3 years, including the 33 restorative justice coordinators that they had on campus. They had only gotten rid of 3 police officers during that time period, as at the same time that they were cutting a massive set of cuts. And in March, you know, BOP went into, it's not here, sorry, I'm just trying to give context for folks. In March, the BOP was able to get, again, another set of resolutions from 2 board members to be introduced at the Oakland Unified. And this was being discussed as there was another set of cuts that would include about another 110 key staff being cut in Oakland. And, you know, it was a very moving and important period. Probably about 75 people came to testify, parents, teachers, you know, the Oakland Oakland Educational Association, which is the teachers union in Oakland, has been locked in step with BOP. BOP was able to really solidify their relationship to OEA with this Black Sanctuary Pledge, right? This idea that how could a district say that they're, you know, a sanctuary? Obviously that's keyword sanctuary for immigrants, but how could it be sanctuary when, you know, 75% of the children who are being arrested are Black children? And it was a very emotional hearing where unfortunately they lost the vote by 4-3 count at Oakland Unified. And of course, you know, you can imagine all the reasons why they couldn't do it. They did win an important momentum, which is that by September, the superintendent was supposed to introduce a sort of safety plan about sort of how would they begin to remove police, or would they even consider removing police. And of course, then, you know, over the last 2 months with COVID and everything else came then the murder of George Floyd. And, you know, of course, Oakland being a really critical place of a lot of revolts. They've been now almost 14 days straight into street actions in Oakland. that ranges everything from police brutality to police in schools to how much does Oakland City, fund, the municipal police. And so in all that moment, right, and the 10 years of the work that Bob did, they helped co-write basically a resolution called the George Floyd Resolution to eliminate Oakland School Police Department. It is very clear that this would be a complete elimination of police. It would sort of restrict, there's clear language in the resolution as is right now, clear resolutions that there will be no permanent station police in schools, the greatest protections for young people in schools. It really lays out kind of what it meant to have police in an enclosed space where students of color are primarily the ones who have to be in these schools, that you're prematurely, promoting their contact with police. It's a very beautiful resolution if folks have not sort of seen it. Can we go to the next slide? And of course, they've now gotten important sort of, both support, key critical support. And I think in this sense, this is where I think they're gonna win. I mean, yesterday, 5 of the 7 board members were very clear that they were ready now to move on this moment. The superintendent finally came to say that she would not block, the moves toward removing police in schools, but the struggle's still real. There's going to be a vote on the 24th. I would believe that it's going to be very critical if there isn't yet a letter from all the key forces that are, any coalitions that you're involved in, any legal sort of advocacy organizations. I know people like Oscar, oh God, of course, blanking on his last name right now. Oscar,
Lopez.
Oscar Lopez, thank you. And he's probably on the call. Sorry, Oscar, who's doing incredible work, right? And has been a key ally also to the Black Organizing Project throughout many years, right? Had a beautiful letter in March that had about 12 legal organizations calling on OUSPD to do it. So I think this is really an important period. There's still a lot of struggle that's going to happen here, right? There's struggles about contracts, right? Can you eliminate, all of a sudden now they've gotten rid of 600 teachers or, 600 teachers and staff. And all of a sudden now they're worried about, well, is this a contract? Can this be contractually done, right? There is, of course, as Maisie is saying, this is so ideologically embedded in all our brains. It's not just, we're progressive and somebody else is not. The embeddedness of safety equals police is so embedded in everybody's culture that they're going to have a massive struggle about how, community can hold safety. And of course, there's going to be important key fights about actual real resources, right? To actually defend it. And even now, all of a sudden now they're saying, well, even if we cut the $2 million that goes into school police, because we're going to have to do some other type of safety, it's not even guaranteed that it would go into the things that Bob has discussed. Again, it's a very disgusting logic that even in April, actually, now we found out that in April, in fact, the police even got a bonus in April during this whole heightened period of COVID. And on top of that, Oakland, in classic sort of style, right, went out and got a consultant from Georgetown University to talk about a safety plan when in fact the community has already presented a safety plan. So I would think that it's going to be really key for us to really support this moment and movement, right? Things that, I just talked to Jackie right before this call, right? Things that she was raising, for example, moves to link the defunding of, let's say, police and prisons, which of course we support. But let's be clear that one weakness that can happen is that you reinvest money, let's say, into schools from prisons, which of course we all support, but the pie only grows. So in other words, the police stay in our schools, but we get additional sort of resources for like key things and critical sort of programs, but the police is not removed from the schools, right? Or again, sort of win symbolic victories. And I know this we've won in Oakland and in Los Angeles, where we're able to like force the district not to take money from LCFF, which in Los Angeles, and I know in Oakland too, they were using supplemental and concentration funds to pay partial money for the school police, arguing that this is a critical sort of role of maintaining a school, you know, a low-income school, a school with a high level of students with community of color. And yet we won, where they removed, you know, they took away, they couldn't take money from supplemental and concentration. But as we know, much of the sort of money from Prop 98 and you know, ed resources aren't you know, very dedicated that way. So they were just going to use money from the general fund. That, in other words, we just sort of played the game of, you know, maneuvering without, and having sort of a symbolic victory, but not a real victory, which is to actually remove them from our school. So, you know, I think a lot of things that we are trying to really sort of really emphasize, right, is that we're hoping that everybody can do whatever they can to support this campaign. You know, it's been beautiful. Again, I'm living a little bit vicariously, but, you know, for years, you know, often when we're in a fight, and many of you must know this, right, we have to kind of, you know, create sort of a sense that there's this growing momentum, and we have to even convince forces that often don't want to be on our side to be on our side. Here we're seeing a lot of spontaneous beauty where teachers and principals and students and just residents are writing letters to the board. They didn't need a sample letter. You know, sometimes we need to write a sample letter for people. They don't need a sample letter. They're writing their own. They're writing their own beautiful messages. They are very clear about giving respect and true radical solidarity to Bob, that this was their campaign. We didn't have new jumperoos who are saying all of a sudden, hey, we want to get rid of police, right? There's been a lot of momentum about respecting their leadership. So I think everything that you can do right now to call those board members to support, to create this sort of sense of whatever kind of expertise you have, that we're going to need your expertise. And secondly, that I hope that we also can have longer term conversations about, you know, what will it take at this level? You know, how do we take both advantages of the moment, right? But also be mindful about harm that we could create by moving and jumping forward too fast without thinking and consulting with people on the ground. I think that's really important, especially on the statewide level, right? And also not to give politicians an easy victory, which is what they want. They want something that they know they can pass, or something that they know is sort of in the so-called low-hanging fruit. You know, obviously it's great that we reached that point that maybe they're saying, let's not give money to police is the low-hanging fruit, because that has not been the low-hanging fruit. But again, in this case, we got to be mindful about then the impacts that it's still going to have. There's still an LASPD, and I know that Students Deserve, and I know BSS, and I know Strategy Center, and others are going to, Public Council and CADRE are going to challenge that and move toward trying to remove LASPD. I know that all across partners at DSC California, from Salinas to Fresno to Sacramento, are moving toward removing police. But we need to hear from them, who've been leading the struggle around this, to understand sort of the key sort of pitfalls that we can fall. And again, I just really want to emphasize why this victory is going to be important for all of us, and why we need that kind of radical solidarity, and whatever we can do, which is what you know, at least the work that DSC and the work that I'm doing with Forward Change, you know, if they want me to go pick up food, then that's what I go do. If they want me to help them, you know, do think about a new policy recommendation or reach out to press, I'll do that. But I think in this case, we need everybody's sort of expertise and strength, and come from that humble sort of perspective of doing whatever we can to support them and to move this campaign forward.
Thank you, Manuel. That's a nice gateway to a question for a number of us. Just to keep, when we pivot this year, we talked about FSD moving in the direction of what we call movement building. And part of moving into, as part of our policy work, as part of the broader movement building. So it's clear FSD is going to do policy, but we need to be able to have some guidance of what is our North Star. DSC, Dignity in School California, has been thinking about this issue as part of our a larger movement building work and direction that we've been going. And one of it is that developing a framework for us to operate as a parameter around the work that we will be engaged in as it relates to police in school. And that is abolishing school police and criminalization culture in schools. So it's not enough to defund. We actually have to, as the North Star, there's us policy people moving in that direction of that North Star. It has to be focusing on abolishing school police and criminalization culture in our schools. And what a part of that is recognizing that defunding without disbanding school police could slow our momentum, our movement for fundamental change. And so we need to operate within that context of all of us who are working in policy. We have to do it in solidarity together and supporting each other and moving in the same direction, understanding that I understand this moment. I understand this critical moment. It's the spark that I talked about some time ago. This is the spark, but in the midst of the spark, we also have to be conscious, focused, strategic, and do no harm in the process of our work. So part of that is that the DSC has been developing some policy frameworks for us to be thinking about. One is what they call the 4 Ds and the 4 Rs: disband, disarm, decriminalize, and to document. And I'm not going to go into great detail because they're still formulating what that exactly is, but that is the work that what we don't want. Remember, I once said we need to think dialectics. One is what we don't want and what we want. Oftentimes we talk about we don't want this, but we never talk about what we want. We don't want police in school, but we haven't thought about what we want instead. So we often go for the okie doke, settle for whatever is the minimum, what they put forward in front of us, versus we articulating what we used to say a revolutionary demand to get them to concede to us. And part of that is what DSC calls the 4R: reimagine, redesign, and reinvest. So it's important that we keep both of these pieces in our head because we're in the moment of change, and that we have to be focused on what that looks like. They're working on something now to be able to provide for us in a couple of days what that will look like for our work in policy. And we hope that we could take this, work solidarity together, develop something, a policy, recognizing that that policy is just a step along the fundamental change of our guiding star, our North Star, to abolish school police and criminalization culture in our schools. So if we're focused on that and we're moving in that direction, that is where we want to go. And that's what DSC California will be providing for us. It's some guidance in that particular area. We'll cut it up, we'll work on it, we'll see how we're going to work together on that and make it work and translate that into policy going forward. Ruth?
Maisie or I mean, when Carl does that, I'm always just what's there to say after Carl lays it out? I just want to acknowledge that some people asked about Spanish interpretation, and we want to share that in the work CADRE has done because of their organizing of Black and Latino parents, that the shadow report was released in Spanish and English at the same time. And if you have other language needs in the community you serve besides Spanish, please do chat that to Jose. Some of our partners from California Endowment are on, and we will figure out what are the best ways to connect with your community leaders who need this message in their home language, whether it's Spanish or another language. So thank you for raising that, and that is the work that we all have to do together in our different communities around solidarity. Jose has been collecting questions. We spent time with the leadership, the strategy team of Dignity in Schools campaign. In our invite, we shared with you all of the organizing groups who are a part of DSC, but as Manuel shared, BOP is in battle as we speak. This is a solidarity moment to share and hold space for their work. And we shared several different pieces with you, both the shadow report that Maisie had pieces of today and BOP's People's Plan for Police-Free Schools in the invite. Jose can chat the Dignity in Schools campaign website and those two reports as well, in case anyone didn't get it. We know some of you are joining by phone and may not have access to the chat. However, you received this invite. You can reach out by email for anything that's missed in the chat. We will have a few minutes for questions, but Carl wanted me to share a couple of our next steps in case your questions are about next steps of support. We asked everyone to chat their name, pronouns, organization, and email. If you got this by email, but you're on the phone now, you know, please, there's a, I think the original invite came from me, but, you know, link back with us. We will make sure you get this, is that we will be sending out a survey to everyone who attended today to find out more about your community conditions and needs. We will continue to share information and the current solidarity needs from BOP, as Manuel began to outline. And as Carl shared, the Dignity in Schools Campaign California team will be sharing a guiding framework. This will be a framework that both makes clear key guardrails about anyone who's engaging with our elected officials and leaders at the state level to ensure that any state level work does not harm the local community work that has led to this moment. And that document will also share key human rights guardrails for transformation, as Maisie and Manuel shared, about how embedded this is and how in your own local community you know the conditions, you know that steps, just as Manuel and Maisie laid out, all the steps that have happened in the last 10 to 15 years that were moments and steps of reform, but to ensure that there is a key focus on conditions that will, on movements, on moments in the district, at the state, that will actually change conditions for Black students and their families. And in that focus on confronting anti-Black racism, what protections will also come for other students who are vulnerable and been marginalized in our white supremacy structure in schools. So, Carl, do you want to do a few questions, or you probably want to center again first?
No, I was asking if there was, you know, afterward we're going to ask for some questions. Just to let everyone know, one is that we will be engaged in this work that will support, and we want everyone to support the work of BOP, but also other struggles on the ground. Two, we want those of you who are engaged in the work at the statewide policy level, please check in with those who are on the ground, because it's really important that we cannot do more harm than good. In our rush to get policy or to get the legislature to do something, sometimes, as those of you who do statewide policy work knows, it's a meat grinder, and you have to make compromise, and you have to make certain decisions in order to win versus in order to help. So, and then we wait, and the impact happens after 10 years, and we realize, oh my God, this didn't turn out the way we thought it was going to do. So it is important that we learn from folks on the ground and support the work on the ground and develop policy. The other thing is, please share whatever you're thinking about among us. Those who are outside of policy that are part of TCE, please check in with us. So if you want to support, check in with us. We will hook you up with those who are doing local work on the ground. If you have some creative ideas, out of the box thinking, I'm all for that. We used to have a philosophy. We didn't believe in trademarks, so we just took stuff. So the main thing is that we need a lot of support, whatever you can provide going forward in thinking. And then lastly, what we really want to make people cognizant of is that we want you to think visionary, but also practical. Oftentimes we go for the practical first because we want to win. And I understand that. I understand when you win, it fires people up. They get really excited. They get jazzed. They have the belief and hope that something bigger can happen. Those who are organizers know that. But what happens is people believe the win, the short-term win, is the end goal, not the ultimate. And so we have to keep this in context in terms of it. And then also learn from those, not just from me. I didn't spray paint this gray hair. I mean, I had to, this is years of working, this gray hair. But, you know, check in with those who have been through the struggle before. And they will give you guidance in terms of how to navigate and to understand the dynamics, and particularly those who are organizers, community organizers. Because community organizers understand the pain, the challenge, the hurt of working with people, and their need for some kind of change, and for those that have a vision of what a different world can look like. And I think that's, we need to see if we can make those connections together going forward. So I was going to check with Victor if there was any questions that people had.
Jose, maybe you know a Victor who looks like him.
I mean, Jose.
It's all good, Carl.
Yeah, there's quite a few questions. It's difficult to get through them all in the chat, but some key themes that keep popping up are like differences in school policing, but in continuation schools, and also how to combat arguments about schools saying that by having the police department on school, they could train them, and so they have like more access to them. And then there's also questions around how to join DSC California and be able to bring other organizations in. And then
let's do that first. That's good. That's a lot. Thank you, Jose. Carl, you want to start with the last one, and then maybe...
Yeah, how you could be a part of the DSC California. We have what is called level of engagement. If you are interested, and I'm assuming you don't live in outer space or in Washington, D.C., I'm assuming you live somewhere in California, find a local organization or a local group in your region. And then you can go up to the website and you can see if there's a local organization, a local formation. Reach out to them, become part of their work. One of the things that we have learned as part of work is that you have to demonstrate that you're committed to do the work on the local, that you can be part of something larger. So reach out to them locally. There's a list, and then participate with them locally. And as part of that work, you could be become part of the DSC California. We have principles of engagement, but it's all on the website. Please check it out.
Well, on that note, we do have to be transparent about something, which is that, you know, we do center the base building organizing groups in Indian Schools Campaign, California. So I know having, you know, and that's why fixed school discipline is really focused on policy advocacy, and that's where a lot of the advocates and lawyers end up. But I think also to Carl's point about joining DSC California, it is really what he just said earlier about how to support. That's like how it would happen in the local level too. You know, because for instance, public counsel, when we worked in LA, it was, you know, it wasn't about defining the issues and getting us to run policy at the local level either. It was also, you know, following the community-based campaigns that we were all working on, and providing technical support or legal, you know, legal advice, or public records requests, you know, policy analysis. It wasn't to run us into a policy campaign that we did not decide. If we decided on one, then okay. But I just want to reiterate what Carl said about sort of how to support. That's why it's sort of hard to join DSC California, because it's not just a collection of a whole bunch of people trying to do something together. It's a very deliberate approach to building a movement that's led with that base building groups shaping the North Star. And then because we have this North Star, it really is about how people fit into that, as opposed to everybody doing something in every discipline of change, and everyone sort of, you know, yes, there are lots of theories of change, but in this particular case, DSC California has a theory of change that's very deliberate about supporting bottom-up led liberatory approaches to fighting for everyone's freedom. And so we do that. I just want to be transparent, because it isn't a camp, it isn't us, you know, it's very similar. We've created this same sort of division so that we can create some perimeter around and protect community-led work, because that's what got us here. So policy followed, but community-led voice got us here. So
I got one more question here.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second, just pulling it up. It says there is some urgency to protect LCFF funds. Oakland Unified School District needs to resubmit plans now. How can we use the opportunity to support Bob's goals?
That's a good question. Part of it is that LCFF plan or LCAP plans are been put on hold until the end of the year. So much of it is going to center around the budget per se. But I think the budget piece is part of the broader struggle of getting people to support the fundamental demand, which is ending school police by 2020. So I think the focus should be on that. And then you can use all the various mechanisms to make that happen in terms of just, you know, making sure that board members support ending school police by 2020. But this is a different period, so it's much harder to speak about the LCAP and LCFF funding because they put a lot of this on hold until next year, and it's a different struggle that we're having at this particular moment.
I'll say, you know, and again, obviously, if folks should individually, well, probably through one of us still, you know, engage with Bob on those questions. But I'd say, you know, things have shifted, right? From in March, it was a struggle. It was tied to a budgetary problem, you know, kind of struggle. But this time around, it's very clear. It's just, it's trying to win it ideologically. It's trying to win it, you know, it's trying to win this from, you know, hearts and minds kind of level, right? And so, again, I think they're going to win. The question, again, is what's really at stake is going to be, can it be leveraged for, you know, higher purposes for other areas? Can we really kind of crush any sort of new hybrid forms of policing, right? This is what Jackie says a lot, sort of a new hybrid form of, you know, they're not going to wear a uniform. They're not going to, they might just have, you know, a nightstick, not a gun. I mean, who knows? I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm not saying that this is what it is, but these are the things that could play out, right? again, even for BOP, right, if you look at their people's plan, right, it's talking about reimagining and even repurposing even the security guards, right? Because this doesn't call for the elimination of security guard. It's about retraining them, then, you know, really centering them to become sort of, ambassadors for the schools, to really be trained in restorative justice and positive discipline, right? These are often our people, right? These are usually our folks that have these type of jobs, right? But now it becomes a professionalized job. It doesn't just become another wing of the armed police. And so I think those are going to be critical things, right? And in that sense, we're going to need everybody's help. And again, I believe that I know in Oakland they've had this struggle before. That the struggle is, again, the LCFF and general funds, they're all kind of enmeshed together. So even if you say we can't touch concentration supplemental sort of resources, they'll just take it from somewhere else, and that's just really at the heart of the problem that we're confronting, right? And again, I think obviously we support defunding at the local level. There's nothing like, we're particularly speaking about defunding on the state level because it could complicate things for people, right? It could either create a larger pie that still maintains the cops, or again, it gives the illusion that we won, but in fact have not won because we still have to deal with it in the local level. Or in this case, right, for BOP, is like, this is a critical fight because it's not just ending a contract. This is ending with the whole, I don't know why I want to say enchilada, the whole enchilada, of policing in schools, right? It's getting rid of a department that's been embedded, that was actually forced, if we look at the history, right, was forced by right-wing forces to have, right, when they were kicking and screaming against it. It was not just them, it was Oakland, it was Long Beach, it was Compton. You could see a set of struggles that are happening throughout the 80s, right, where communities were saying, on one hand, we can't afford it, and two, that there was going to be implications to having cops in schools. And so again, how far away we've gone from where we're at in this moment when it seemed like they're so normal for police.
And I don't want to interrupt the aspiration that Manuel just shared, but I also think on the LCF LCAP question that LCF LCAP needs to be changed. So in many ways, sometimes we are trying to make that horrible process a little bit better, but it's literally doing harm because it's literally being hijacked for public safety and under the guise of supplemental concentration, helping, essentially the Black and brown kids and the kids with special needs and disabilities. So it's been, there's no accountability. So even if we could force it into a different kind of plan or a different kind of notation, it doesn't have any weight and teeth. And so I think, to me, that struggle is also about LCFF and LCAP in and of itself. Separate apart. I know there's been a lot of, and we started monitoring LCAP funds right after LCAP went into place, and we found out pretty early on in LA that that's what they were using the money for, because it was to bring the school police department back up to pre-2008 funding budget levels. That's what that was for. And everybody, and at the district level, you can't permeate the central office dictating that. So it's a very difficult struggle. And I appreciate the question. I know there's been a lot of work recently to analyze LCAP, LCF data, and it may create like aha moments for some folks in certain places, but just know that is also, we've sort of learned that it's a very, unfortunately, weak apparatus to prevent corruption on campuses. Wanted to add that last piece.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for that important point, Maisie, because I think what some of that point is asking, especially a lot of our partners who focus on state level changes and how this is borne out in communities and the shell game that is so much of the way budgets happen. We know we are over time. We got questions about if you're a community leader or organization on the ground and you want to realize this moment, but you haven't, you're getting context, you want support. When we've centered BOP, it doesn't mean that BOP has an infrastructure to lead everyone along the way. So what we want to acknowledge is that we are working in solidarity to figure out what these processes of support will look like. We believe what we've shared with you from the CADRE Shadow Report and Bob's People's Plan really are fundamental political education tools. Things we want people to ask themselves, you know, how far are you, where are you at right now in your community in this struggle? And we are making a commitment as the Fixed School Discipline Policy Coalition to meet every 2 weeks for now. We will be sending out a survey, and it will be day to day, moment to moment. So much is being asked of so many of the leaders who've led in this fight. So we're trying to figure out what's going to make the most sense on infrastructure. So thank you for knowing that Fixed School Discipline we'll do our best as a partner in solidarity. And thank you for everyone who stayed past time. Thank you to Manuel and Maisie and Carl. And thank you all for your trust and partnership in this moment. Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
And we will be in touch, and we are taking these questions. Sorry if we didn't have that. Would have gone 3 hours if we just fired off all the questions to our presenters. And feel free to email follow up, and we will continue a process with you all. Thank you for the solidarity. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.